everybody. Welcome to BCAF 2022, our second virtual BCAF in a row. What we're doing right now is we're just going to take some time to have a conversation with Damian Duffy and John Jennings, as of a very short time ago, the Hugo Award winning creative team of the Parable of the Sower graphic novel, based on Octavia Butler's novel, Parable of the Sower. Let's have a round of applause.
Yay. Let me see, hold up, let me do this. Yay.
Yeah.
virtual clapping. That's awesome. Yay.
So I mean, let's just start off with congratulations. I mean, you got the Hugo Award.
Yeah. Thank you. I expected to have like a spaceship or something afterwards, some kind of cosmic powers. That hasn't happened yet, but it's a great honor nonetheless.
Or I expected like that I would be gifted with a gentleman named Hugo who would then help us move into our new home. But that didn't happen either, so it's okay.
Thought I could Hugo Weaving, Agent Smith. Agent Smith.
Yeah, great.
Never showed up. What is this award?
He didn't even show up for the sequel. He didn't even show up for the Matrix sequel. So
So we're off topic already. Yes, no, it was
yes,
surprising and a great honor. And yes, thank you.
No, seriously, I was totally gobsmacked. Like, for instance, like when Damian like texted me, I was washing dishes. Actually, I was washing dishes, and Damian was like, I forget, it was something. I forget how you phrased it, but it was like it was pretty clever at the time because Damian's very clever.
Remember?
Yeah, but it was something like getting ready to change your bio or something like that. It was like or thereabouts.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? Because I was looking at the time, but trying not to look at the time. Because we didn't really think about it up until the point where like you kind of have to think about it, right? So I mean, were you obsessed with it, Damian? Like just
I purposefully have to pretend like it's not happening until I can no longer ignore it. So it's usually like in this case, because I was logged onto the Zoom for the awards ceremony. So even that I was okay pretty much until like the category before ours. And then I get like a little tummy ache going and stuff. Yeah, it was I get a little nervous.
Yeah, getting nervous. Yeah, and I'm looking at the time, and so of course the time difference, messed me up too because I was like, okay, what time is it going on? And of course I'm trying to like focus on our move because we just moved to a new place and pack up stuff. And and then Damian texted me, and I was like, what are you kidding me? It's like, yeah. And then we talked for a second. He was celebrating with some friends over with beer and pizza, as one should.
Yeah, which was actually that helped distract me. Like during, I think I said something in my speech about it.
Yeah, but, yeah, that's a good thing. So, and and he did the acceptance speech and looked great doing it. And his speech was just really well constructed. It was just very humble and. I think you got everybody in, for the most part, what I'm saying, I could think of. And I was very moved by the experience. Like my wife, who never cares about anything that I do too much, was really moved as well, so yeah, it's been cool. Yeah. She's even told people like, John won a Hugo, and they're like, what is that? That's great.
I feel like Hugo people seem to react more like it's just a different subsect of like geek community of people who are like you can tell what people read by what award they react to, because some people are like Eisner and like, what's that? But then Hugo, they're like, oh my god,
right.
It's just funny, like the different like communities of like readership that we intersect with working with Octavia Butler's work.
That's one of the things I find really interesting, right? Is that this is the second book this is the second Octavia Butler novel book that you have adapted.
Well, Damian's adapted. Actually,
it kind of adopted us, but yeah. We're just gonna make fun of Stanford this whole time, guys. That's what we're doing now. Way to talk.
And so yeah, I mean, your first one was Kindred. Kindred got all the attention. I mean, New York Times bestseller. It was, you got the Eisner Award. You've got just award after award off of that, and it's like following up with Parable of the Sower. I mean, when you were doing Parable of the Sower, I mean, or before you even talk about how you're doing it, why don't you for the three people in the universe who don't know what Parable of the Sower is about, what's Parable of the Sower about in 20 seconds or less?
Oh, you got that shoot, Danny. Go ahead.
Okay. Parable of the Sower is the story of Lauren Olamina, teenage girl in Southern California, in the sort of dystopian, like just post-apocalyptic, maybe right up in the apocalyptic world of it starts 2024. And it's this kind of like nonsensical science fictional world where there's climate catastrophe, wildfires, severe income inequality, preventable diseases running rampant, and more so in the sequel book that we're working on now, but in both books, kind of pseudo-fascist president. Anyway, it's the story of Lauren developing her own religion, or in her words, discovering her religion, Earthseed, as she travels to Northern California, gathering a flock along the way. It might have been longer in 20 seconds, but there you go.
That about sums it up.
That was really well done. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that was also interesting about about the book, and Damian, you start to talk about it, especially when you talk about about the totalitarian government that's in state, is that this book was written decades ago, and the president that Octavia Butler imagined was running around saying, let's make America great again. And it sounds all too familiar. And that's led to a lot of people talking about Octavia Butler as a prophet, right? Could you talk a little bit about that? Like what was it like working on something, especially because this was done before Biden came into office. So this was done in the midst of, really in the thick of things.
I mean, really, like after the success of Kindred, we were given choices about like what our next Octavia Butler book would be by Abrams and the estate, which was really an honor, because they like trusted us enough to say, hey, you know what? Here's this canon written by this brilliant woman. What do you want to do with it? That's extremely humbling. And, but at the time, our former president, I think, had already won the election, Damian, is that right?
Yes, because it was right after Kindred came out in 2017. So it was like January 2017 when we laid claim to Parable of the Sower.
Right, that's right. Yeah, so we decided to do, both books. It was a two-book deal. Right now, like, Damian is already like, our script for Parable of Talents has already been approved. I'm, tasked with drawing it, which I'll be gearing up to do very soon. But yeah, it was unnerving, looking back at it now, like with the amount of trauma that I think we underestimated the amount of trauma that we'll put ourselves through to a certain degree, because we had no idea like that Trump was going to be as horrible. And
I mean, we had some idea.
We had some idea, but
yeah,
I don't know if anybody had thought like, oh,
he was responsible when he started giving, Octavia Butler imagining the worst of the worst a run for her money. Like, that's not good.
It's not good at all. Yeah, and so I guess like when we were working on it, we were thinking about like just the fact that Octavia Butler wanted to create something that was a warning. It's not necessarily at the most. Not necessarily prescient, it is and it isn't, but she was really writing about like how a government becomes a totalitarian government, right? I mean, that's kind of like what she was using, Ronald Reagan, who also used that phrase, by the way, as a template to a certain degree, and of course, like when you look at Jarrett, who's in the second book, Parable of the Talents, he does seem kind of like a merging of like the kind of populist, icon like a Trump, merged with the really, really overbearing Christian morality of like a what's his name?
Pence.
Pence. Thank you. When I was thinking about him, I was thinking about the X-Men, the dude from X-Men.
Yeah, Stryker. He looks shaped like Stryker.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't help myself.
God loves man kills.
Right. So anyway, yeah. So that's kind of like where we are. I mean, and so yeah, we decided to take that along because it was almost like a yes, we wanted to sell books, but we also because that's why you make things in this market, but also we wanted to kind of like talk about what was happening in the world, and it was really surreal. I felt like when we were working on this, that every time I stepped outside of the apartment complex that I lived in, I was stepping into a parable of the Sower, right? It was just, I mean, literally like the world is on fire, right? I mean, fire tornadoes and all of that, right? It's just
and I mean,
yeah.
I think going along with that, like Stanford, like you were saying, people calling Octavia Butler a prophet is almost kind of doing her a disservice, because it's not like she got a magical vision from somewhere. She just paid attention to the world around her and, logically projected what for her were like sort of the current politics and sort of the current, economic circumstances of the time, projected it forward 30 years. And I think the fact that she was so prescient, so right on about so many things really speaks to just how much she was paying attention, and what a great researcher she was. And just,
there's no magic.
Everything else.
Yeah, it wasn't really, it wasn't like this magical gift, like saying right, David. It's like she wasn't looking into a crystal ball. She was using the right to reflect the world. She was using the book as the novels that she was writing as mirrors, like reflections of what was happening in real time. And we're just unfortunate that, the time that we live in is actually like really, really not paying attention to what she was talking about, which is unfortunate. Now it's funny because I was thinking about like the fact that now, many, many years later after those novels were written, like Parable of Sower she became like a New York Times bestselling writer, right? Because everybody's like, oh, you need to read 1984 to get your mind around what's happening right now. So no, you need to really read Parable of the Sower. That's actually better. That's actually what we need to.
And that's actually one of the things that's really interesting, though, is that when we think of these dystopian futures, I mean, a lot of them are kind of off in some way, and the stunning amount of accuracy in Octavia Butler's work, right? I mean, I when I look at it, I think to myself, it's like she warned us, we didn't listen, and it just flat out happened, right? And I'm saying that also counts the fact that we're in 2022. 2022 is also the year in which Soylent Green takes place.
Yes.
And while it did predict global warming and a few other things, I mean, it's like, I guess we could be eating people and not knowing it, but I think what's interesting is like when you start, I think of that meme where they have like the dates for all these different sci-fi shows, and they're like kind of like where we are in relationship to them. And I think it's just really interesting that she was one of the most accurate. I mean, if Blade Runner should have happened by now, right?
Yeah, that was 2019.
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of that, I think, in part it's that she was specifically writing the book as sort of a warning, as a if this goes on warning type of book, which I mean, Soylent Green and Blade Runner have aspects of that, but they also have aspects of just sort of like fantastical things, right? What's some cool wacky stuff we can do for the future? And I mean, there's like very like slight bits of that in Parable of the Sower, but overall everything she writes about are things that are like unfortunately perfectly reasonable, like can happen in a realistic physical world,
right
in the way that they do. And yeah, I forgot what I was going with that, but I had a good point. It was amazing.
It was amazing. It was the best point I've heard all day.
Oh, you know what? I was gonna say, I mean, I think part of it, just that she was like kind of a great self-taught sociologist in a way, or perhaps anthropologist. But also that she, you know, she was a Black woman who had been had seen the worst that society can do. You know what I mean? Like her family had, she was well aware of like, this is how people are. And, you know, really, this is how white people are, if we're being honest about it. So
Right.
like the fact that she was coming from that, you know, place of like, I always feel like her work is very unvarnished truth, right? It's like, I'm gonna tell you how it is and you will take it. And that's it. And I think that that's part of like the sort of power of the books and why people are sort of picking them up as like guidebooks for the apocalypse or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, which was really cool because Olamina, you know, Lauren was doing that too, right? Like she what I like about the way that Octavia Butler gets out of her characters, I mean, there's so much of her, and I think in a lot of the characters that she's writing, obviously, and I definitely found that to be true with Dana from Kindred, and you know, maybe even doubly so with Lauren Olamina, because she comes to, you know, Earthseed, the religion that she founds eventually, through research, through like, okay, well, this doesn't make sense to me. Some of this makes sense to me, but I'll tell you what if I actually go and do some research on this particular faith? But she's also looking at climate change. She's also looking at the shrinking resources in the country. She's also looking at like some of the things that she borrows from her father, who's a Baptist minister, right? But also things that she doesn't really agree with in Christianity too. And she combines that with just logic and, you know, understanding how human beings are. She's like, okay, you know what? We're going to use up the resources on this planet.
Mhm.
We need to find another place to go. We need to populate the stars, right? And so, you know, that's she basically was doing like, she was acting like Octavia Butler would, like, because she's ridiculous. She was ridiculously meticulous with her research. I mean, it almost becomes an expert in a field before she writes a novel. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's pretty wild. So anyway, just wanted to add that.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, like in the way Earthseed is formulated, I think you get a sense of like her pragmatism as sort of a like a futurist or whatever. Like she doesn't really invest any of her story in like some amazing technology that, you know, allows us to teleport or something. You know, there's none of that. Like any of the sci-fi technology you find in it is like pharmaceuticals that give the main character this sort of depending on how you look at it, disability, because she feels what she sees other people feel. Or, you know, the technology is just like more militarized private vehicles and stuff. Like it's very within the realm of possibility.
And that's also, I think, what really makes her stuff work, right? I mean, you know, I mean, I actually think of some of the conversations that we've had over time, like be they at the kitchen table or at comic conventions or even on panels, right? Where a lot of times when we talk about what works for us, and I know especially for me, like you know like I have this love and frustration of zombie narratives because they don't adhere to you know, as a former archaeologist, I look at it and I'm like yeah, but if you drop a whole bunch of people out in the middle of nowhere, because I've had that happen to me, and then you have to do a job, you know, you really don't think about these things, like, and I think that's what's interesting is this very rigorous understanding of how humans behave in groups, how you know, how people behave socially, how cultures form, like you know, and I think that's part of my love for the narrative is getting into those questions as opposed to just jumping to, oh look, something bad has happened, we've devolved, might makes right, and no, look at this new technology.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it feels very natural and not plotted out.
Right.
Like she's good at hiding the machinations of like, you know, writer, right? You never read something like, oh, that's clever. You're like, oh no, Lauren is screwed. You know, like you're much more invested in the reality of the narrative. That's definitely like one of her great talents.
Well, the other thing that I find really interesting is it's one of the things I think that a lot of science fiction gets wrong, is a lot of times it assumes that that religion and culture follow science. When if you look at the history of humankind, it's actually science follows religion and culture, and by that I mean like it's they always posit this idea that we embark into the stars and all of a sudden we become rational, and religion and cosmology gets kind of shunted off as, oh, those are just these quaint little cultural differences amongst those of us who are less rational, right? When the history of the world is genetics started amongst monks. Like a lot of our learning and actually a lot of our science was originally put towards ultimately religious questions, right? Like a lot of the math and sciences were extrapolations trying to sort out those types of things, very practical things. And one of the most practical things is how we see the world, and that's religion and culture.
Right.
That's why it's called a cell, right? It's a monastery cell. That's where you get cell from. Pretty sure that's true.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting too, like this science fiction story, barely science fiction story, is called Parable of the Sower. You know what I'm saying? She's actively utilizing methodologies by which, Christianity in this particular case was taught, through these allegories and stories. I think it's quite brilliant to do that too, because people are used to having these religious anecdotes, parables and allegories given to them in these ways. But she really does turn these teaching methods on their ear, and really questions everything about like just, from humanity, religion, morality, on its ear, and does so in a very kind of Tolkien-esque way. Like, it's interesting because what I mean by that is like she takes like the road trip idea, and just kind of pushes it into these really, really terrifying arenas. You don't know what's going to happen next. And actually, like to Damian's chagrin, right, she adds a gajillion characters at the end of the
night. Look, I understand your world building, you're planning on sequels or whatever. I was down to like the last 30 pages of graphic novel I had to fill all the story in. And it's like, here's 3 families. I'm like, what? I can't. How? How? I mean, I think we did okay, but there was like a bunch of backstory I wish we could have got in for some of those people. Although, I mean, a lot of them carry over to the second book. So I think, there's a chance to kind of catch up with them more in Parable of the Talents. But yeah. I mean, it's an expansive world. I mean, back to the religion point, I think it's interesting that like Butler, to my knowledge, was atheist. She grew up religious, but like in her adult life was not really interested in it. Other than in the way in this case, like the way it could be used to motivate people to work together. At least that's like sort of the way religion, I think, is utilized and talked about in these books. Right. But done so in sort of like not value neutral, but like a both sides kind of way, sort of, right? Like it shows religion as, having negative and positive consequences. So it's not like judgmental or anything, and it's very deeply considered. But I do think in the end, it is just sort of another aspect of, this is what moves human culture. This is what moves society. This is how groups form. More so than really giving into like, it's not like Butler. I mean, people have done this where they've taken Earthseed and sort of, enacted it in real life, or sort of brought religious practice to it in real life. But it's not like Butler ever really was trying to do that. I don't.
That's right. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. I want to say that she used her writing as extensions or tools, you know, to analyze hierarchies, right? And so, you know, of course, religion is full of hierarchies, and you know, she often said that, you know, she was afraid of the fact that mankind always creates those hierarchies and then tries to situate themselves at the top of that hierarchy once that structure is created. And so you have like this really, really amazing tension that she sets up between um, the last bastion of those different types of systems and hierarchies that they set up, and then what comes after, you know. And it's almost like um, Lauren Olamina represents the what comes after, you know, but she's using her knowledge of the systems that worked and then mixing it with things that people maybe haven't tried before, you know. And yeah, it's really interesting. And the other thing that's really interesting too is that Lauren starts out really, I mean, she's a teenager at first, right? And then by the end of Parable of Talents, she's what, Damian, in her 80s?
Yeah, she's in her like, I think she's 82, 83, something like
Yeah,
that.
exactly. So you have to track this woman's growth from becoming this like super smart, very, very concerned, very prepared. And also, I mean, some would say that she has a disability, right? Because she has hyper empathy, right? So it depends on how you look at it. Some people say it's superpower, or people could think of it as a disability. But you know, this idea of utilizing something that is considered a weakness in the story, you know, because a lot of times people with hyper empathy in the story are being like controlled. And just to be clear, like hyper empathy is this, I guess you would call it I don't want to use, is birth defect the right? I don't know. That
Yeah,
sounds
it's like it's a
improper.
neurological condition
Yeah.
because the character's mom took this like over the counter drug
Yeah.
for
Supposedly
like
for like brain for like
yeah,
increasing her intelligence, or
it was
like
kind of like the way kids would take like Ritalin or something to like study in college or whatever. It was like sort of like recreational use of a drug kind of thing. And so it has like completely scientific explanations. Like it's not like a magical power she has or something.
right. Yeah. It's more of a not a mutation, I guess, but it's related to that particular.
It's a side effect.
It's
a
a
side
exact side effect. There you go. It's a
And
side
like,
effect.
and she said, I mean, it's actually it's technically a delusion because she's not like actually feeling the pain. She's feeling what she perceives to be other people's pain or pleasure that she sees.
Right.
So it really is sort of all in her head, but she's still sort of like a lot of the kind of Earthseed mythos. A lot of this is all in her head, but she manifests it in all these different ways.
Yeah.
And I think that's why people are sort of drawn to her as a almost aspirational figure or kind of inspiration for community organizing, because she's an example of a leader who is very good at it, even though it's like the most hostile world you could possibly found a religion in. Especially well, I guess both, but especially the second book.
But isn't that often where religious ideas emerge is out of hostile environments, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like to think of it as, or like to think of, it might not be the right term, but I think of it as, you know, we have these stories, and what work does story, what is the type of work that a story does, and one of the things that it does is it gives us something to lean on in the cold, dark night, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you have these stories that you lean on in the cold, dark night over and over and over again, they get retold, they get formulated. The sun comes up the next day, but you're still living off that story from the cold, dark night. And I think that's, you know, that is a part of it. And it happens even in our everyday lives. Like I remember like some of the digs I've been on where like there are stories that we would tell, and then we'd be still talking about those stories the next day. And it would be like this little thing, like then we'd have these inside jokes related to the story. Then something would happen and someone would say something where they would draw a parallel between what's happening and that story. And next thing you know, that story is woven into the fabric of our, not our individual lives, but it's woven into the fabric of how we relate to one another. And so it's not that big of a leap to go from that to from that to traditions,
Mhm.
to folklore, to story, to religion.
Right.
And it's funny, Lauren in the book, like she actively fights some of that. Because like when she's talking to Ben Coley is a character who she sort of gets with in the latter half of the book, who eventually becomes her husband. Spoilers, not really. But he talks about like if this takes off, like people will make you a messiah, right? Like they'll think of you as otherworldly, as they'll hold you up as a religious figure. And she's like, not if I have anything to say about it. It's like
Right.
it's a religion about change. You really don't, right? And that's the whole point of your religion. So even Lauren has these kind of blind spots of like knowing sort of how things work, but still kind of like accepting herself from it in certain ways. Which that just made me think of that like even when you actively resist these stories, once a story is sort of ingrained, it's hard to pull away from it.
Right.
Well, yeah, and I think that's, I mean, it's a powerful story, right? I mean, I'm almost hesitant to ask, what you can tell us about the next book, about what is essentially the sequel.
I mean, people should have read it by now. I'm not worried about spoiling things, right?
Well, it's not just about spoiling things. I mean, one of the things I find it like one of the things I love about Parallel to Sower is all the attention that you put into creating a visual language around this world, right? And I'm even looking at John, the picture that you have of Parallel to Sower behind you, right? Like, one of the things about comics is that when we're talking about movies or television, when you come to look for someone, you have to go to casting, so you got to find someone that kind of looks like it, right?
Right.
So you're looking for somebody to bring that idea to you, but comics are unique in that you start with a blank page. If a character is white, it's because you chose to make them white. If a character is black, it's because you chose to make them black. If you're going to use red to represent a black character, as you're doing in the picture behind you, that was a choice. That was an affirmative act.
Mm-hmm.
Everything about this world is an affirmative act on both of your parts. And so I'm kind of curious about what type of affirmative acts were involved in the creation of the sequel. What were some of the challenges? I mean, so it's not about spoiling the story. It's about getting some insight going in.
I see. Okay. Well, I mean, it's still on the visual side. It's still being created. I still have to draw the entire book, so that's ongoing. One of the things that I've been thinking about, because I'm working on characters and stuff, is and I think it's been approved, is what Lauren looks like closer to the end of the book. If you recall in the first book, she ends up like cutting her hair pretty low to kind of have a more masculine, hopefully, appearance, to stop her from, hopefully, to dissuade like being attacked, because she's a woman on the road, and so I've been thinking about her in the language of her hair, like how important, like, Black women's hair is, as far as like just culturally. And one of Lauren's colors is green, of course, because she's the sower, like she represents growth. Yeah, and that's what this little mold represents, a seed, that we use to mark her as the sower, kind of thing. And what I'm just design wise, I think what I've done is like taken this green band that's going to be around her head here. That's going to be part of like the visual language of what she becomes. And then like there's an image that I did of her. I thought about her as like a weeping willow. You ever seen a weeping willow where like the trees are like very like they kind of spread out and they hang very low. I wanted to try to make her into like a living tree, like a human tree. So her dreadlocks would be like snow white and just kind of draping down like this beautiful tree. And I came up with this gown that designed, and Damian's seen it. It's almost like her story is like in the weaving of her gown, you know. So in the bottom part, it's kind of like something that looks like fire, you know, because of course, as you know, Robledo is burned is raised by the paint face, the scary paint face people, and then in the middle, you know, she goes on this kind of like quest or what have you. So that is actually like kind of indicated by growth, like almost like plant-like things that are in the middle, and then of course at the end of it, it's this black part that's going to look like a star system or like glittering like stars or something, because he's trying to get to that particular place. So, you know, kind of building like using the same type of ideology that people use when they created like religious tapestries and like religious stained glass windows and stuff like that, but different, like the same kind of like picture language, but applying it very differently, you know, in those spaces. The other thing too, you have to remember about the second book is that even more so than the first one, it's more of an epistolary. And what I mean by that is like if you look at like, or it has some of the trappings of an epistolary, which means it's cobbled together from different types of writing. You know, in the first book, we're visited with Lauren's inner thoughts in her diary, and in what becomes like the Earthseed kind of quote unquote Bible, you know, right? The guidebook to the Earthseed, the books of the living. And then second part, you know, you actually have a lot more of these different voices coming in, because you actually have stuff like Bancole's words are in there and stuff like that too. And again, all this is being interpreted by her daughter so, who is also, I think, when we meet her daughter, she's like what, 60 something, I think.
Yeah.
So
I had to do some math for that, but yeah,
yeah,
like,
there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of
yeah.
moving parts, you know, that we're working through. Damien and I are going to actually, we still have to have this meeting to look at like the planning out of Camp Christian, which unfortunately,
Well, Acorn,
yeah, exactly, yeah,
and then yeah,
so all that kind of stuff. So there are a lot of moving parts visually, even more so. It's daunting actually. So, but we can do it. We're going to do it. We got to do it. So
yeah. And that was in writing the script. I mean, that was a big challenge, was figuring out how to delineate the different narrative voices. Because I mean, it's still majority from Lauren's journals, but as the story goes on, her daughter takes over the narration more and more, and sort of goes on her own journey. So sort of figuring out a visual language to differentiate between those sort of levels of narrative was a big challenge. And then in the middle of the book, so, okay, to be honest, when we pitched this, I had only read Parable of the Sower. I had not yet read Parable of the Talents, but my thinking was Parable of the Sower, it's like, you know, very dystopian, it's very dark. Surely it can't get worse, right? And then I read Parable of the Talents and I was wrong. So
exactly.
There's this like, and again, it's not really a spoiler because it's not the kind of thing you spoil, but there's this kind of concentration camp, internment camp sequence in the middle of the book. And we'll see how it goes. But in the script, I mean, the script's been approved, so I guess that's what we're doing. But I actually changed the like layout and format for that entire sequence because, you know, a lot of the main characters are sort of in bondage. So I had this idea of putting the reader sort of in bondage too, where they have to read in a different way. So it's reading across the 2-page spread rather than page to page during that sequence. So that when they finally break out, again, spoilers, but when they break out, like you break out of that like page sequence. So, I mean, and a lot of that is just trying to use the medium of comics to, you know, communicate and do justice and connect with readers in the same way Butler does with prose.
Right.
But I think also there's kind of a level of formalism and craft that John and I are both drawn to in comics that provides some comfort while we're portraying these like
most ghastly, horrific
scenes, and not like the fun horror that like we kind of cut our teeth on, but the like, you know, deeply disturbing because it's so real horror.
Exactly.
like banal evil of, you know,
Yeah.
reality of
Yeah.
Christian totalitarianism, basically.
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah. So yeah, those are some of the big challenges of the writing of it. But I'm done with writing it, so I'm fine. It's good.
Yeah. So it's just, now we're, I just have to draw some of the most horrible things and then color it and make it more salient. Yep. That's
Yeah.
all. Yep.
I get to letter it, so
You can letter it, exactly.
the screams of terror and stuff.
So it sounds like you're really describing revisiting trauma.
Very much so. Oh yeah. Yes. Which, honestly, probably in my gut is like, it's probably has been like a stumbling block for certain. Not like we haven't been busy, because there's been a lot going on since then. You all know, but it's like, it needs to. Even Abrams, I think, was traumatized. Like, you know what I'm saying? Because I think, like, because we're in the middle of the pandemic, and our editor Charlotte Greenbaum, was working on it, and then I think that there's a level of like just how this particular book has affected the people that worked on it in general. I think, and I don't think anybody's in a hurry to go get back to the world, but it has to be gotten back to, So but
no, I mean, I finished the first draft of the script in early March 2020. So it was the last, and it was the last time I traveled. John and I were talking at the Huntington Library Museum,
yep,
where Butler's personal papers are, and I saw the Parable of the Sower opera, Toshi Regan's Parable of the Sower opera, and then I went back to my hotel, which was across the street from Pasadena Community College, where Butler went to school.
Yep.
And I finished the first draft, and then I went home, and it was like lockdown orders, plague time. So much like John was saying, while working on Sower, I had this experience of I finished the script and then I went to live in it. It felt like
right, and went to go live in it. Yeah, exactly. So,
like honestly, I've been struggling, like writing and stuff since then. I think in part because it's just like recovering from working on these two books. In part just obviously the stuff we're all struggling with.
Yeah.
Wanting to go see the new Spider-Man movie again. And right, that's what
I
we're
haven't
talking
even
about.
seen it.
Oh no, it's the plague. Right. Sorry. So struggling, but also just sort of like it's not behind us yet, right? We still got more parable to tell. So it's really hard to get into sort of other mental spaces and work on other things right now.
Yeah. And I think I've been actually kind of the opposite, is doodling away on other things when I should probably be doing more character sketches than I've done, that kind of thing. So it's like,
I mean, it took me a long time to write the script. I mean, it's a long script, but also it's a longer book, but also it took me a long time just for the same reason. It took me a long time to start on Parable of the Sower for the same reason. Mm-hmm. Is there's this undeniable sense of dread that comes along with diving back in.
Yeah. And it's interesting, and thank you for mentioning Jackson, by the way, in your acceptance, our acceptance speech. Is that when we're doing Parable, we're working on Parable of Sower and giving it shape and form, my wife Tawana's like pregnant with our first child, Jackson Kirby Jennings, right? And so it's just, thinking about the world that he's going to be born into, was just really daunting, And there's also like, there's pictures of me coloring it with him in my lap, that kind of thing, So it's like, so I'm looking at the quote unquote Afro future in my lap while I'm making this really, really undeniably traumatic graphic novel. And people talk about how violent, and we were very careful about like how we depicted the violence and stuff, but it's a very unnerving level of violence. We have this torture and this, rape and murder on a level, that is really, really disquieting, even for people like ourselves who are really big huge horror fans actually. So it's like, and again, it's because it's so close to the real. Like I can watch any kind of fantastic violence, from people's heads blown up like in Scanners, or people being absorbed by aliens or whatever, like in The Thing. But you show me something that is like closer to a real experience, and it just is totally. I have like a very, very visceral, like, nervous reaction to it. You know what I'm saying? And it's just because one is totally fictionalized and fantastic and over the top, almost comedic in some ways. The other one just sits with you, and that it's possible, and I think that's why people expose themselves to Butler's work like that, because she doesn't write happy things. She doesn't write, she's here to entertain you to a certain degree, but she was also trying to work out things that were bothering her, were probably keeping her up at night too, and thank the Lord for her, because she did leave us a legacy that I still trying to fathom, like how it even exists, because of just how much stuff she went through, and the types of ideas that she was dealing with, like really large, world-changing ideas that we've been honored with the wonderful responsibility, of right now we're dealing with these particular stories. So it's like, and it's changed our lives. It's changed our lives. It's changed a lot of people's lives actually, which has been wonderful. Mostly for the good. I think, and it's allowed us to move in spaces that we never would have imagined. But also there's like Damian said, there's a sense of dread and like, doom to a certain degree too. Even though, I mean, Parable of the Talents actually does end with kind of an upbeat tone, right? It's just like
as upbeat as you're gonna get with Butler, I guess.
Well,
yeah, that's one of the reasons why I like Wild Seed so much, because it's a draw.
Yeah.
It's
As long as you don't read the rest of that series, you're good.
right. You're good, exactly.
But like John, what you're saying, just going along with that, I mean, I think it's also true. I think Tananarive said this in one of her podcasts with Monica Coleman.
Okay. Octavia tried to tell you.
Yeah, Octavia tried to tell her.
Yeah.
Or Octavia tried, or whatever.
Yeah.
She said that the book kind of breaks you to make you stronger. So
Right.
like as you go along and like go through these traumas with the character, you come out the other end, stronger for it, like healing in the broken places, that kind of idea. Which I thought was a really good, like a good way to talk about what the intrinsic value of this narrative is, and hopefully what we're adding to with like the visual vocabulary that we're used to. And then oh shoot, I can't remember her name. It's a cast member of the Parable of the Sower opera that I went and saw when I finished the first draft. Right at the end, she said that it's a powerful thing to have a place to put your grief as a description of the story, and I think that was also like one of the like sort of most perfect, succinct descriptions of
I think that's wonderful.
What it's for.
Right.
I think her name
have to have
Hagrid
kind of
something.
What do you say?
She's great. I think her name was like Hagrid something.
Wow.
Anyway, that was the cast member who said the thing. I didn't say the thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can find that out. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, and yeah, I mean, it's going to be, I'm curious. I'm really excited about how, what's going to happen when this book comes out. Because I think about when Parable of the Sower came out, it came out, and then we went into lockdown, right?
Yeah.
And this book is going to come out hopefully when we're coming out, as opposed to, some of the other foreboding things that could happen. And I'm, so that's something that I really am like waiting with bated breath. I'm like waiting with bated breath for the book, and I'm waiting with bated breath to figure out what the context of the book is going to be.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's. I'm hoping that it's like the end of the Wiz, where like we're like taking off the hazmat suits and stripping out, getting back into the brand new day. Hopefully,
easing on down the road, huh?
Easing on down the road, and that would be great. We'll see. It's going to take a while to make it. Like I said, Damian has he's set forth like a really intricate, smart very formalist way of thinking about the story, but also, again, you know, reading through it, it's like, yeah, this is the book. You know, that's how I felt about the first one. I was like, oh wow, this is actually like, this is for real an adaptation of Parable of the Sower. You know what I'm saying? Like I read the script and I was like, this is I feel like I read the book, but as a comic book. Good job. You know what I'm saying?
Thank you.
Good job. You know? Yeah, because they barely changed. Like we were fortunate enough to have Tanana Reeve do as the I guess like kind of sensitivity editor, if you want to call it that, because she read through and had very few remarks about the story, you know, and because we wanted to privilege, you know, a Black woman's voice. We didn't get a chance to have that kind of agency with the first book, but this one,
and also someone who is deeply knowledgeable of the book,
right?
Because like Kindred, I had read many times in the past prior to getting the job. Parable of the Sower, I'd only read a couple times before we actually started.
She does it every year.
Yeah. So, you know, having that sort of wealth of knowledge also was like really important.
Yes, very much so.
But yeah, like much to my continued shock, she was just like, "You're good." I was
like, what? Okay. That's how we felt when we did Kindred too. It's like the estate was like, yep, this is Kindred. Print it. And we're like, oh, okay.
Sure, because like we can fix stuff.
Right.
Well, well, on that note, I mean, we're kind of coming to the close of our time. Thank you so much for making yourselves available for this. I want to I want to, you know, it's always great to have these conversations. It's even more fun to have these conversations as a part of BCAF. And what's going to be also really fun is that we'll be able to have these conversations also in a month, where BCAF is going to be working with Chicago History Museum to put on an event called Black Comic Chicago. And the rumor is that the two of you will both be there, and you know, so we'll have plenty of opportunities to continue this conversation. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Stanford.
Thank you. Great
Thank
to
you,
see
Damian.
Love you.
Yeah, you too. You too.
I love you
guys.
Greetings. I'm Congresswoman Barbara Lee, and I proudly represent California's beautiful 13th Congressional District. I would like to thank the Northern California Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Community Foundation and the Alameda Labor Council, AFL-CIO, for inviting me to take part in the Voting Rights Day of Action. On this day of action, we pay homage to the principles Dr. King fought and died for. In 1965, President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law, calling the day a triumph for freedom as huge as any victory that has ever been won on any battlefield. Activism, organizing, marching, and the pressure from Dr. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Council helped pave the way for this American milestone. Dr. King called the law a great step forward. However, Dr. King was aware that voting could only be effective if a potential voter did not have the obstacles and fear associated with casting the vote. Yet, in 2022, many of us, especially people of color, are still facing disenfranchisement at the polls. We can no longer wait, especially as January 6th insurrection showed that white supremacy never left our halls of democracy. Many people still face the same fears as they head to the polls. So I thank each and every one of you for getting into some good trouble, as my friend and colleague, our beloved Don Lewis, encouraged all of us to do. We cannot be full participants of this democracy without the right to vote. We cannot let go of this fight. We must keep going. I'm proud to be with you virtually today in the spirit of Dr. King and his quest for equality, and I look forward to working with all of you this year, as Dr. King said, to save the soul of America. Be safe. Thank you again.